If you're not identifying the KPIs in your business properly, then you could be missing out on a tremendous amount of revenue. My name is Ben Sturtevant, and I have been helping online businesses build, optimize, and scale since 2003. And in all of the years, I've audited thousands and thousands of companies, and virtually all of them know the income goal that they want to reach, but they don't know how they're going to get there. And it's the very first step that I take with a lot of the clients that I take on. And I'm going to bring you over to an app that I created. It's totally free. If you want it, just comment KPI down below. I'll send it to you. But what this allows you to do is kind of plug in some numbers and get a clear picture on where you're at and what you need to do in order to improve or change things. It really can help you kind of pinpoint the levers that you can pull. I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say, you want to get to 100,000 a month. Now, realistically, this should be close to where you're at. Okay. If you're struggling, even getting past 20K a month, then don't set it to 100K, obviously. Let's say you want a 4X return on your ad spend. You've got a $5,000 offer. Let's say you're generating about 1,000 leads a month. On average, the industry average is about a 10% apply rate. Okay. I'd say 5 to 10%, but I'll be generous with that. On average, there's a 50% show rate and a 30% close rate. This is assuming cold traffic. Okay. You might say, well, Ben, I get a 90% show rate. If you're doing 10 calls a month, sure. Okay, but that's not going to work with the cold traffic and doing higher volume. But let's just assume these are your numbers. I'm going to click calculate. This is going to give me my KPI breakdown monthly, weekly, and daily. And it's important for you as a business owner to do this, even by whether you're a solopreneur, especially if you have a team, making sure that everyone is on the same page and knows what numbers they need to be striving for. So if your goal is 100K and you have a 5K offer, then obviously you just need to make 20 sales. I know it sounds easy. What this will do is it's going to tell you how many leads you need to generate, what your cost per lead needs to be, what calls, and so on. And what usually happens when I start working with clients is I show them these numbers and they start to realize something's broken. Okay. And typically what I see is something in the show rate. Maybe it's, they've got a 40% show rate and their close rate is not as high as it should be. Their apply rate is way less than it should be. This is typically what I see. They're like, oh my gosh, well, we're paying $15 a lead and, we're only generating 1,000 leads a month and, we're only getting 40 live calls. This is why they're at 50K a month. And so from a CRO standpoint, when I evaluate a business, the very first things that I'm looking for, okay, well, what levers can I pull in order to make this work? And so I created this what if analysis down below here. So these are the numbers that you see now, but watch what happens. Let's say, for example, that we could improve the show rate to 60% and we can do our apply rate. We get to 10% above, 30%. That's fine. Let's go to 35%. You see what happened? I need a lot less calls. I went from 80 live calls needed to 57. I went from 4,000 leads to only needing 953. Our cost per lead can be now 26. We're making a lot of assumptions here. Now you can't always improve everything that much. So let's go back to, let's say we're still getting a 50% show rate and it's still a 10% apply rate, but all we did was improve our close rate. Still, it's not 80 calls. 80 calls versus 57 is a lot more doable for a business. $22 cost per lead. Now every industry, every niche is different, but depending on where you're at, you are either struggling to get to these numbers or you've got some of them. Right. And that's typically what I see is usually it's people who they've got a fairly good number of leads coming in, but they don't have a very good nurture and back end system. And that's why having these things is so important because obviously as you're going through this, the more leads you're putting in, if you have leaks in your bucket, and that's essentially what these are, every level that you go through this funnel, there's a potential for leaks. And so that's what optimization is all about and knowing and being very clear. Now, once you get these numbers dialed in, you can say, okay, this is realistic. These numbers that I'm looking at here, we as a team can get to this. That means that we know that we need to hit this at the bare minimum. Okay, so let's reset. Let's do this again. So we want to get to 100,000 as a company. We want a 4X return. We've got our $4,000 value, $5,000 value. We want to get a 10% apply rate. We want a 50% close or a 50% show rate and a 30% show. These numbers are going to be doable for you as a team. Okay, now what you need to do is you need to be able to say, okay, weekly, our team needs to be hitting this. If you're working with your marketing team or you're working with your sales team, nurture, your messengers, your setters, whatnot, you need to be communicating with them and you need to be tracking this. And this is I think probably one of the bigger takeaways, hopefully, that you can get from this, creating the ability to track this and making sure that your team is aware of it. So if you're doing a weekly call with your team or if you're doing it daily, I don't think you need to hammer on it daily because the averages for the week are what matter. So for example, you might have only booked one call that week or that day. It's not a time to freak out. Okay. But if your goal for the week is 16 and you're doing your call on the Monday, you're looking back at the previous week and you're saying, well, we only had 8 calls. That is a red flag. Why did we only have 8 calls? Well, maybe you had 30 or so book, but only 8 showed up. This is going to help you identify a leak. And those leaks need to be identified and plugged. It's a red flag. So these are things that you need to be looking at, but your team needs to be aware of them too, down to the daily. So if you're working with setters, and you're driving a tremendous amount of ad spend, or you're doing a lot of organic efforts and you're driving people into Messenger, we need to make sure that we're booking 4 calls a day in order for us to get to that level. And you don't have to do this with ad spend. Maybe you don't run ads, okay? You can still do the same thing where you don't need ad spend, but you need to be generating the same amount of leads. If you don't run ads, we're talking about organic messaging, most likely. So if you're not going to run ads, you still need to generate the leads. But every day, your team needs to be, hey, we generated 4 book calls today. We hit our goal. Or 5, right? We had 2 live calls that were taken. This is how you develop a strategy based on your actual data. Okay. Now, what you need to be doing though, is you need to be using realistic numbers. I've done some calls with people who say, well, Ben, I only generate 100 leads a month and I book 10 calls from that. And I have an 80% show rate and I have a 70% close rate. That makes it a lot easier. You still need the same number of sales, but you need a lot less leads and a lot less book calls. The problem is at the volume that you're going to need to do in order to get that many book calls, you're not going to get 36 book calls from 100 leads, right? So you're going to need to 3x your lead generation in order to get there. Doesn't matter if you're running ads or not. What matters is, are you hitting the numbers you need to hit in order to reach the level you want to get to? Because someone who's doing 100 leads a month organically and booking 10 calls a month, they can do well. You can create a fairly good income with that, right? You don't need, if you're doing 10 calls a month and you have a 70% close rate on 80% that show, so 70% are closing on 8 people that show up for calls. You can make a pretty good high ticket. If you have a $4,000, $5,000 offer, you can make a nice little income with that, but you cannot scale that. Okay, the way that you scale that is by getting more traffic. So how am I going to get to 357 leads? Well, you could 3x your organic efforts, I guess, but that's going to run out of steam pretty quickly. And therein lies the problem. That's why we run ads. That's why I recommend that everyone runs ads, because you can create that repeatable business that allows you to really calculate what you need to do. And as long as you're staying true to the data, shouldn't be a problem. You should be able to consistently generate leads, track your numbers. There's going to be ups and downs. Yes, it's never going to scale vertically like that. I've never seen that happen. There's going to be ups. Some one month you're going to have a great month. Sometimes it's less. Times of the year, economic factors, political factors, natural disasters, all kinds of things, holidays, everything plays into, to paid traffic, even organic traffic, and getting results. Nothing is ever super consistent the way that you want it to be. But on average, you can get to, if you have your KPIs and you know your numbers, you can reach your goals and you can maintain them, but you got to make sure that you're clear with your team on those.